All right. This is your Gaza War Sit Rep day 205. No end in sight, but not for lack of negotiations. There are negotiations going on. There are negotiations going on. The Egyptian team, the Qatar team, they're all very active. I've seen articles around the negotiations, but the same thing has been going on with these negotiations as every other round. The resistance has the requirements of a total end to the war, a withdrawal of all troops, and a the ability to rebuild, which means aid and also free access to everybody to go to the north and everybody to go to wherever their homes are, and then for Gaza to be able to have trade and access to the outside world so they can begin to rebuild their home. And Israel wants to get their prisoners back and resume the war. So these are incompatible and they remain incompatible. And so the war goes on. There does not, in that sense, for all of these negotiations that have been happening, the war goes on. There do seem to be even more cracks and even more strains in Israeli society. And this is, I haven't even said anything about cracks and strains in American society, but I don't think I need to get into that. We have talked about the campus intifada already, and that process also does not seem to have any end in sight, despite the incredible repression, the police kicking students off of their campus and then occupying the campus themselves, the snipers being escorted into position by university administrators, every kind of horrific, perverse thing that you can imagine happening in the Ivory Tower is happening with the police takeover of these spaces. So, but in Israel, meanwhile, you have one minister getting hit by a car. I guess he's back in action. There was another Israeli politician that got into an auto accident, and it's, once and twice. What do they say? First time coincidence, second time happenstance, third time enemy action. I wondered if this was some way of settling scores between the Israeli elites, people having accidents and so on. But one could never have any evidence of anything solid on that kind of speculation. So in the meantime, you have a minister Smotrich saying, if we don't invade Rafah, I'm leaving the war cabinet. And then you have apparently another minister, Gallant, saying, unless they, or Benny Gantz, I don't know, they all seem the same to me, but it was one of them that said, unless there's a prisoner deal in exchange, I'm quitting the war cabinet. So one of these people, unless they're lying, which they often do, is going to quit the cabinet soon. And there have been huge demonstrations in Tel Aviv. I've seen video. The demonstrations in Tel Aviv are big and they're being viciously attacked. The one I saw was viciously attacked by female Israeli police, but tons of violence, tons and tons of people, many, many people on the streets demanding a prisoner exchange, especially after the release of several videos about the prisoners from Hamas. Settlers storming Al-Aqsa Mosque over the Passover holiday. And the other thing I wanted to dispel, there's been news about how desperate the Israelis are to avoid arrest warrants from the international, I was going to say the Israeli Criminal Court, the International Criminal Court. I want to say I don't believe the hype about the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court has existed for a long time, decades now, I think. And Israel, I don't think, is a signatory to it, does not believe itself to be subject to its jurisdiction, neither does the United States. The United States, as people may know, has signed an act saying that they will invade. They have a law saying that they'll invade The Hague. It's not called, I think it's been nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act. I don't think it's called the Hague Invasion Act, but they will invade if the court tries to arrest U.S. officials did who committed offenses according to the ICC in the course of their duties. So the United States and Israel do not consider themselves part of its jurisdiction, but that does not stop them from interfering in it and corrupting it and suborning it, which is what they've done, which is why the court is completely stitched up and has never done anything about Israeli crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity. There's never been an arrest. There's never been a warrant. And there isn't going to be. You guys, I'm sorry to tell you, there is not going to be. The United States is not going to have to invade The Hague because the prosecutors are not going to, they're not going to issue warrants. So I will happily accept the egg on my face if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty confident in the corruption of this court. The ICJ was an open question for me. I was surprised at their ruling, but it's the ICC that would have to actually follow through and arrest these people or issue warrants for these people, and it is not going to happen. This court is under the control of the US, and it will not do things that the US doesn't want it to do. It is one of the earlier. So if you look at this genocide as the progressive discarding of valuable international institutions, the US has discredited or ignored the International Court of Justice. They've ignored the United Nations General Assembly. They've undermined the United Nations Refugee Works Agency and killed many of their personnel, and then claimed that they were combatants. And they've completely rendered useless the genocide prevention personnel agency in the United Nations. They've made an absolute joke out of that person, whoever they are. And they've then finally culminating in the discarding of the United Nations Security Council. When the Security Council passed a ceasefire resolution, the United States said it was optional. They believed that it was non-binding, they invented something called a non-binding Security Council resolution. But the ICC, this was discredited and corrupted and suborned long before this genocide. This was something they discarded and rendered useless long before, at least in the case of Israel. They've used the ICC to indict African leaders, and the non-African leader that has been indicted is, I think, Mr. Putin of Russia. So it is exclusively and entirely politicized in Western interests. Don't expect anything to come out of this court. Now, what we're seeing with the campus intifada is they are also discarding the campuses, the elite universities, which are the training grounds for the elites. This is where the elites meet one another. This is where they find marriage partners among the elites. This is where they also train in professions of the elite professions that they're going to go into. And so discarding these is not a small thing. It is not a minor thing. They have been fighting to try to make sure that these institutions are thoroughly Zionist and that they only allow the pro-Israel perspective. And they, now that they realize with the encampments that that's not going to be possible, they are progressively going to, it seems, just discard this generation and hope that the next one does better. That is also a huge cost to them. It's going to be a huge cost to them, and it's going to be one of those costs that reverberates over a very long time. So all of that is going on, and all of that is why we come to the general conclusion that no end is in sight. Now, let's report from the fronts. Gaza, fighting in the north, in Beit Hanun and in Zaytun, there's bombing all over. I heard about bombing raids in Rafah, a lot of bombing of Rafah. Um, Hard to tell what the what the end game in Rafah is going to be, but I can tell you that any invasion of Rafah won't change the outcome for Israel whatsoever. So there's a lot of hype about Rafah and how it's going to change the game, and it's not. It's not going to change the game at all. It's just going to be another place where they go in, they take their positions, they come under fire, they lose armored vehicles, they lose groups of soldiers, they commit horrific atrocities against civilians and withdraw. I can already tell you that that's what's going to happen because there's no reason to imagine that this group of people with this set of equipment and this set of tactics is going to achieve any other result against the opponent that is similarly disposed and that has fought them in the center of Gaza and in the north of Gaza. In the West Bank, however, we have the continuing escalation of the conflict in the West Bank. In Jenin, we have a report from Soraya Al-Quds Jenin, where they attacked the Salem military checkpoint just out of Jenin. Other reports from all over the West Bank as well over the past few days since my last sit rep. Lebanon has been a major. I reported on a big ambush last time. There was another major attack on Al Manara, another major attack on Meron. These are attacks that seem where missiles and drones seem to be just getting through Israeli air defense altogether, where they seem to be doing huge damage. There's video of the missiles landing, the explosions. This is not something we have seen very much of until now, but there do seem to be genuine problems with Israeli air defense relative to Lebanon right now. They seem to be the batteries that the Hezbollah has targeted seem to have played a role in keeping the missile defense line, I guess, sealed. And without those batteries that have been destroyed, there do seem to be leaks, and there does seem to be missiles now getting through fairly regularly. Israel's responding with deeper and more airstrikes into Lebanon, but that's not solving their problem, and it's not stopping any of the missiles hitting them. Iraq front, Iraq has announced that they hit Haifa with some drones, so they claim direct hits on Haifa port with drones. Yemen claims to have hit the Andromeda Star. They also hit and took down another MQ-9 Reaper drone. So another big, expensive drone taken out by the resistance. So these drones, both the Hermes drones by Israel and the MQ-9s of the United States are now quite regularly being shot down, shot out of the sky, which is going to force a change of doctrine. Or they'll just, like they have with their Merkavas and their Namur APCs, just accept that they're going to regularly lose these extremely expensive specialized pieces of equipment. The other thing with Yemen is, I've reported this before, but Yemen is training ground forces for war in Palestine. They made a video of their forces and training in tunnels, training in very much similar light infantry equipment as you see the Palestinian resistance using. So rocket propelled grenades, light arms, ghillie suits, sniper rifles, and they seem to be training for maneuvers in tunnels. I mean, again, unclear how they're planning to get there, but if this war does go on for years, they will get there, and they will be another major, it'll be in the entry of an army into the war, another army into the war on the side of the Palestinians. So that's got to be something that the imperialists and the Israelis are looking at with considerable dread. Um, that's all the reporting from the fronts. And I don't have a really deep dive today. I did want to say a few things about campuses because I had this idea. I've had this idea for a long time, actually, about campuses because of what campuses have become. Campuses have basically, if you go back and listen to my podcast with Davarian Baldwin wrote a really good book about what the campus has become, basically, what the university has become. I study how universities have evolved every so often. I read there's a book called The Fall of the Faculty I read a few years ago. There's a book called, The Neoliberal University. There's books about what's going on. And what's going on is that a couple of dynamics have been at play with state schools. There's been a cutting of government funds. One author calls it the tuition trap. I can't remember his name, but he's a professor. He writes about the university. He's an English professor somewhere in the States. And the tuition trap is where the state reduces the amount of funding available, the university increases tuition. The university doesn't collapse. Students find a way to pay more by borrowing more, essentially. The families borrow more. So the student loans go up. Students are paying for this education for longer after they're done. The banks are have this source of loans that they uh, get you for the rest of your life. So it's ultimately a kind of the banks are splitting this money, this profit with the university. So the university charges more tuition. The bank is the one that makes the loan, and then the students pay it back with interest over the course of their careers. And each cut of government funding leads to a corresponding rise of tuition, and the cycle continues because you've just rewarded the university for raising tuition. Now, that's one little cycle. Another cycle is because the government, because they don't rely on steady government funding, universities try to build these huge endowments. So an endowment is when they try to get donors to give them huge amounts of money, and the huge amounts of money that they then invest in the stock market or in other investments or real estate or whatever it is. And that endowment is the source of is a source of revenue or whatnot. And the endowment, they're answerable to the donors, and the endowment and the investments of the endowment are inevitably in the military industrial complex. And because the military industrial complex is interwoven with Israel, there's inevitably huge investments. All of these campuses have huge investments in the Israeli genocidal war machine. Um, and then there's the role that the university plays in the city where it is. And a lot of these universities are in these cities where they kind of expand parasitically into the city, and they um, play a role in making the city impossible to afford, and they create the process of gentrification that people have, urban scholars have can tell you all about, or urban activists can tell you all about. So real estate and military investment and tuition and rent collection have become like the primary business of universities, and then teaching classes and doing research is very, very distant second and third priority. So the challenge now is and I think it's a good challenge, is, you know, is it possible to have a university with just students and teachers? Isn't it still the case that that's really all we need, especially when all of this technology is at our disposal for such reasonable costs, the social media and video, and I'm coming to you now over YouTube. But if the university administrations and the state, if they do go through with all of these ideas, like sending government officials to monitor whether every utterance that everybody makes is pro-Israel, firing faculty, getting rid of tenure, purging students for participating in protests, well, then maybe we'll have to gather together and create some kind of actual university that provides education as its first priority and teaches things like critical thinking and reading and writing and values things like academic freedom. And maybe we could charge some money, grant and pay instructors a meaningful livelihood, and but we wouldn't charge $100,000 a year of tuition, and students wouldn't have to break their backs to go into debt. But maybe hundreds of dollars, or and students could get a really good education for some payable, manageable amount of money of tuition that then pays the instructors a livelihood. That could be done online. Um, so I think a pro-Palestine online university of the purged is probably going to be something that we need to make in the future. And so I just want to announce that I'll be there. I'll be there, and I'm happy to work on it with you when, if and when any of us get fired or thrown out. We'll find a way to finish your educations. We'll find a way um, to create a credential that people value. It won't be valued by pro-Israel people, but there are many people that will need skilled and critical thinkers and people who know how to work in teams and all kinds of things that universities teach, that instructors know how to teach, specialized knowledge that instructors that are going to get fired will have. And we can put that together. I think we can do a really good job. So on the one, I just want to plant that seed. I want people to think about that, because there will be a struggle to take back the university and reclaim it by the communities who are there, the students, the faculty, everybody who works there, everybody who lives in those cities, everybody who was priced out, everybody, like the Emory University statement that I read. Um, but if you're purged, if you've been expunged from the university, if you've been thrown out for your political activity, we should gather together around and work on making that kind of academy that should exist. One that's a real learning community. There's a science fiction author that I like, that I mentioned. I gave a somewhat harsh review of his book about climate change, Kim Stanley Robinson, KSR. There's an interview where he said that for human beings, a utopia is just two people talking to each other, and I really like that. That's what a utopian classroom is, right? A utopian classroom is a teacher and some students and talking to each other, maybe writing some things down on a blackboard or in their books, right? Um, so all of this repression, not just today, all these police and all these beatings and all these horrific scenes that we're seeing from campuses all over the West. All of this, and for decades, going back decades, trying to prevent people from using the word apartheid, it was at a time, or using the word intifada, or whatever they're doing, trying to prevent today. Um, all of this has just been to prevent people from having a community, a group of students, maybe a teacher or two, talking to each other, knowing that when students and teachers have a chance to work on something, they eventually get to some things that are true. And this genocide happens to be a very obvious truth. And so they have to go to great lengths to stop a simple learning community from forming. And so if they do a purge, as I suspect they might, unless they're afraid of this, if they do a purge, that will create an opportunity too. It'll create a commensurate opportunity for the building of uh, an academy and a university that that actually works the way that it's supposed to. And for that reason, it's something to think about and something to work towards now. And because again, Palestine has always been the test. It's always been the area where academic freedom is repressed, and the laser focus of the the epicenter of the earthquake against academic freedom that everything flows from. So the starting point for a new academy would be uh, the freedom to talk about and teach and learn about Palestine. It would be a pro-Palestine online university. So keep that on your radar. You may end up hearing about it again before the end. And meanwhile, we will continue to report on events on the battlefield where this war will be decided. And in the meantime, hang on, hang in there, like and subscribe, comment too. See you in the next one. We'll see what they do with the comments. They've been giving me trouble with the comments. And I'll see you in the next one.